Thank you very much for the introduction. I feel a little bit like the next thing you would have known about me with my vital statistics, but anyway. Thank you very much to both the EPA and the HSE for inviting me to speak here. I'm conscious that I have followed an extraordinary intervention with Iski and an absolutely fascinating talk from Simon that we've been following each other around for a couple of years, the Wheel and Simon, and we keep coming in within touching distance of each other, and I've read your stuff. It's the first time I've heard you speak, and I would like to sit here and listen to you for another few sets of 20 minutes. And also, I feel a little bit like the Patsy, because you are predominantly, I guess, public servants. You have already mentioned a huge amount of practical interventions and engagements with citizens and with people that are already successful, that already have longevity and research backing them up. Look at some of those posters out there. So I get to talk about the challenges to participation. So normally the voluntary sector person is the person who has the wonderful photographs and has the nice stories and has the wonderful feel-good aspect. And you've brought me in here as the only, well, one of the only voluntary sector people, and I have to talk about all the negative stuff and all of the challenges, and I have to somehow link participation with policy wonk stuff, like how to actually try and get a grip on this from the top down, to release bottom-up movements and all of that lovely stuff. So I can speak about really positive stuff as well, and if you give me another opportunity on another occasion, I will show up here with really nice photographs and extraordinary examples of some really brilliant stuff that's already going on all over the country, on its own, independently, spontaneous, but also in partnership with these agencies and with many others. But with that in mind, here goes with all the negative stuff. And I just want to situate this in a programme of work. The Wheel is the national organisation of community voluntary charity organisations. Our job is to champion and represent and support these organisations to make positive social change to effect a fair and just Ireland. One of our strategic objectives plays really centrally to the theme of this meeting, so I'm really delighted to be here, which is to demonstrate the crucial value of participation in community and civic life and in public decision making. So if that isn't a recipe for the content of this conference, I don't know what is. The flagship initiative that we've done in this space, the flagship initiative that we've done in this space is a programme that we've called the People's Conversation. And it ran from 2015 to 2016, and there's a report, Citizens Rising, that we published in 2016 at the end of it. It's now in a phase 2, and we did this with the partnership of the Carnegie UK Trust. So I hope you take this, in one sense, in the spirit of which it is intended, because the things that I'm going to say are rooted in where real people are at. This is what real people in real communities across the socioeconomic spectrum, across the rural-urban divide, are saying and feeling. You might feel hard done by when you hear things that you think aren't true. You might think that that's not fair. And I get that. But I'm here today to reflect and to help you to listen, which is what I've been asked to do, and how things can be done better. And I think that's what I'm going to try and do. So the first part, I don't want to get too much into the negative side of things, but what I want to do is to focus, and I guess, on where people are at, their lived experience, but then what are the policy implications across that. And it's quite macro. It goes beyond health and environment and well-being into our entire, I guess, society and how we run the country and how we have this, I guess, the contractual relationship, the psychological contract between the citizen, and the state. So, for the purposes of the Wheel's work, for the purposes of this talk, we understand citizenship not to be the legal term of the Irish passport holder, but we understand it to be a role that can be fulfilled to a greater or lesser extent by anybody really with a stake in Ireland's future and indeed Ireland's future in the world. So it will include the passport holders, yes, but EU workers, non-EU workers, refugees, asylum seekers, overseas students and others, right? So understood in this way, citizenship, can be interchanged, or citizens can be interchanged with the word people, and I will do that interchangeably. So I'm using it in the broadest sense. So with citizenship understood in this way, Hundreds of people took part in this People's Conversation project that we initiated. And over the course of the year to 18 months, 15 different civil society organisations convened over 30 conversations in sort of various group meetings, which involved over, I guess, 400 people. Again, so it's more qualitative in one sense than quantitative. Meetings took place in community centres, in the offices of national voluntary groups, in hotels and in art centres, and also in prisons, which was very interesting. And people participating were asked two very open questions, nothing more scientific than that. These questions: what is shaping our future? And what do citizens expect? And what is expected of citizens? Again, interchanging the word people with citizens there. These open conversations, open questions, they prompted really deep and challenging discussions, allowing participants to take a step back from day-to-day issues to really focus on the long term. People spoke really passionately, they listened really respectfully, and each conversation was different and raised a different set of issues and reflecting the concerns of where people are at. But as the conversations continued, there was a whole number of common themes that began to emerge about revealing, I guess, aspirations that were widely held across the volumes of people that took part. But as I said, I'm here to talk about the bad stuff, not about the aspirations. But so really it's about engagement challenges, because all of those aspirations in those conversations, the aspirations were recorded, but also the engagement challenges were also recorded, and the barriers to participation. There's 10 of them, and I don't want to speak too much, I'll just make sure that I get through all of them. The lack of general opportunity for people to participate, or a perceived lack, a lack of awareness of the opportunities, an insufficient appreciation of how important participation is in general, and and a lack of appreciation of the idea of citizenship more generally. For many, there's an absence of basic economic security necessary to participate, with some saying that, going so far as to say that that's a structural social exclusion that they experience. There's some people a lack of time to participate in anything other than keeping the show on the road, themselves and their families going. There's a lack of self-confidence, and we mustn't forget that in this country, 25% of Ireland's population are challenged in relation to basic literacy. So that has to be understood. There's cynicism and lack of trust between citizens and institutions, and vice versa. Is undoubtedly a factor. And, you know, will anything happen from my involvement in these engagement processes? People ask. There's also evidence that policymakers sometimes appear to regard engaging with citizens as something that they kind of just have to do in a tick box. You know, sort of witness some of the really short consultation period just before Christmas often. And in relation to health and well-being and environmental progress in particular, and this was named, the issue of commercial advertising that encourages maximum consumption and a live-for-today attitude without any regard to the long-term collective health or environmental well-being consequences is a factor, as is the general rise of individualism that we're all exposed to, which has the impact of de-emphasising our individual commitment to community well-being. The media phenomenon of expert guidance, and actually, when I mean expert guidance, I mean you guys, the actual experts. And think recently about changing attitudes to the food pyramid and saturated fats. Think about advice on alcohol and coffee. Think about advice that affects me, the owner of a diesel car, in relation to the attitudes that policy brought in relation to petrol and now diesel. And of course then there's the people who just have no interest in participating. Is that okay? It's really quite vexed and an unsettled question whether it's okay or not. Should there be an imperative to participate? Or is it entirely within people's right to abandon participation and responsibility for collective well-being to others? Perhaps on the grounds that it doesn't matter what you do. So all of these issues arose, and they were reflected in the Citizens Rising report. And what that then happened was that we brought a reference group of over 20 people together from all of the sectors, private, public, voluntary, commentator in the media and academic. And we mined these findings, and went back up in the elevator to, identify the 5 grand challenges that we could, as a country, through policy interventions, if you wanted to make a plan to maximise citizen participation across all the walks of life in terms of the public policy engagement, there are these 5 challenges that the various policy interventions, would need to address, and I'll go through each of them briefly in turn. So, first one, the need to increase participation in public decision making, and the findings from the Citizen Rising report is very clear in the analysis of it. We should begin by reversing the centralisation of government. And I'm conscious that in the room already I've heard hugely appreciative and value-adding statements here written about the role of local government in rolling through policy. And I'm not taking away from that at all. But public administration, from the perspective of people, is very centralised in Ireland, with government departments or national agencies controlling many services that are in other countries the responsibility of regional government or local government. And this is despite various programmes of local government reform being put forward over the years. And there's a European level, there is evidence at European level that more centralised states, they lose out economically, and decentralisation and delegation of power and decision making fosters economic welfare through greater consideration of citizens' or people's wishes and needs. And we mentioned the public participation networks, structures and processes supporting that now in place in local authority areas provides a great opportunity, if adequately resourced and engaged with by local authorities, to deepen citizen engagement at local authority level. And the programme that you're running with the Irish Environmental Network and Social Justice Ireland is absolutely spot on. We're doing other work with the EPA around sustainability toolkit, and that's all good. But the core fact remains that citizens must still look to the national level for meaningful influence on many of the issues of most immediate concern, including health, education and policing. The Council of Europe has noted that recent efforts at local government reforms in Ireland have promised much on decentralisation, but haven't provided necessarily the concrete steps required to really move in this direction. And in fact, some of the steps being taken are in the opposite direction. So local government reform has to be viewed as unfinished business, and a great deal more has to be done to move decision making closer to the people it most directly affects. Second area was, second big challenge, I guess the ground challenge, was nurturing active citizenship. And this is where the role of the sector that I come from plays a really important role. So if we aspire to have active and involved citizens who are motivated to participate in public life, it's going to be messy, right? And we have to just accept that. We can't just say we want them in the healthcare areas to be engaged and lively, but we don't want them to be speaking up for themselves. So we have to support those places that nurture this kind of activity. And it's here. Thousands of organisations. Look at that example of the coastal groups around the country. I was so impressed by that. And it's everywhere across all of our communities, that kind of engagement. From local small groups to large charities and national organisations, they make up what's known as the community and voluntary sector in Ireland. And these organisations serve as incubators and engines of active citizenship. And voluntary activity is a form of active citizenship in its own right, but it also equips individuals and communities to participate more generally in public life and democracy. But although Irish people volunteer really generously in clubs, group and association, we're really quite low and below average in our participation in local democratic decision-making processes. A plan and a strategy to support both the voluntary sector as well as volunteering as a separate activity has to be a priority if we're to nurture our sector as a place where many public services are delivered in partnership with the state, but also as a space for itself as an incubator of active citizens. Equally, within the sector, we need to embrace our role as an integral part of a healthy participative democracy and demand a greater say in decision making. That's the bit that we can't allow ourselves to shut up. And whilst, obviously, there is a natural tension in the messy business of reconciling the roles of participative democracy and indeed the more traditional representative democracy, the tensions are an absolute requirement, and managing those tensions are a requirement of having an active citizenry in your country. And managing them and understanding that they're healthy and they sustain a strong democracy with active citizens at its core. And actually, in that regard, we are pleased to see the new Department of Rural and Community Development and Minister Ring with responsibility. And there is an ongoing engagement, and I saw it on your little snaky chart there, Simon, about the framework for local and community development. And I guess we hope that that strategy acknowledges the voluntary activity as an integral part of a participative democracy. We need to understand that we need to change the way we do civic education in our schools. What people learn about power and authority in action, in how the school runs and operates, teaches them about power and authority all through their lives. So we need to not just tweak with the junior cert curriculum like we've done, tweak with the senior level curriculum. We need to open the classrooms, and I guess it's places of learning. They need to be permeable, they need to be democratic spaces. Now I'm talking utopia, I get that, but really that's where, I guess, what young people experience, it really shapes the attitudes. It's just too important. The third challenge is building trust and respect. We do have a crisis of trust, and I think this does play into this contract of citizenship between the citizen and the state. The citizen has to be able to expect fundamental rights, and in turn is expected to comply with the basic laws and customs and responsibilities placed by being in a country on them. So we need to work towards a culture change where the public institutions assume good faith from the citizens they deal with. Trust in public institutions is important, but we have moved beyond basically the point where institutions can demand the trust of people as a right. They need to demonstrate their trustworthiness, and therefore transparency is absolutely key. A key role for the Ombudsman and enshrining their role in the Constitution as opposed to relatively vulnerable purely in legislation as the representative of the citizen, giving it the same status as the Controller and Auditor General is really, really important, as is the Open Government Initiative. And it's quite interesting that information needs to be treated as open by default and only when there's compelling reasons not to release it. And in that regard, the proposals made by a consultation with civil society around the government's National Action Plan for the state's membership of the Open Government Partnership made a whole plethora of recommendations in this regard that haven't yet been picked up on in 2 national action plans. So we would like to see and suggest that if you really want to mean business, this is an area that you can actually pick up on transparency. Supporting the citizens' information infrastructure so that citizens have a place that is separate to the clientelist representative democratic place of elected politicians to actually learn about their rights, their entitlements, and to offer and understand their responsibilities. The fourth is to really understand that citizenship has to be understood in a global context. I guess any definition of citizenship is challenged as exclusively Irish or national, is challenged by the realities of climate change, forced migration, resource depletion, and of course, the simple bonds of human decency and common humanity. So our membership of the United Nations and our pool sovereignty with our colleagues in the European Union has contributed to a huge vindication of a set of common rights. But it's also had the effect of actually putting some decisions at a greater remove from the individual person, and people can often feel that they have no influence on decisions that get made internationally. So what we need to do is to enable a place and a space for critical discourse around the European project. We need to understand that it is a very important part of the democracy. We need to pick up on the points that John was saying about the Sustainable Development Goals. It's an absolutely marvellous framework for stitching a lot of these policy engagements into across the whole plethora of government. And it is the place where citizens can really become engaged at understanding their role, I guess, in the policy framework. The concept of development education in schools is a very important one, and indeed having the space to understand that, I guess, the shared humanity and the shared challenges. The last challenge, really, of the 5 challenges is resourcing and empowering citizens. And really, it's about helping people to understand that we can't just create opportunities, we have to realise that the material conditions and basic security of people affect their ability to participate. Most of the people who will be most affected by political decisions are those least likely to participate by influencing them, and that diminishes our democracy. And there was discussion of the various ways that people find themselves with less opportunity and what can be done. We could start with guaranteeing citizens a material floor. A guarantee of a minimum standard of living to all would remove many of the material barriers to participation, whether via a living wage or a guaranteed basic income, ensuring every citizen has sufficient resources to meet basic human needs. It really is a prerequisite for citizens to engage with each other on an equal basis. We could also enshrine economic, social and cultural rights in our constitution, as the Constitutional Convention recommended 2 years ago. And in conclusion, really, I've covered a huge sort of whistle-stop tour through how to create the utopia of Ireland. I get that we're not in the business of creating utopia, but why the hell not, right? Can we not have an exciting, big, hairy, exciting, fantastic vision of a utopia that work backward so that we can understand the shared places that we have? The voluntary sector, the public sector. What's really interesting is that we are both public benefit sectors, where we are different, we think about the other. There's a huge area of possibilities. I too am very optimistic, whoever said they were optimistic in my previous speakers. And I guess the phrase top-down facilitation through addressing those grand challenges facilitates and enables bottom-up movement and social engagement, and knowing when to get involved and knowing when to get out of the way is key to that. And I have loads of examples to talk about that, but I'm out of time. So thank you very much.